I have a confession to make. I have never written a single test in Laravel. Now, before you start angrily commenting or clicking away on this video because this person on the Laravel channel is supposed to know everything about Laravel, that isn't always the case. And I figured this would be a fantastic video for you to learn along with me of what it looks like for someone who hasn't written a single test yet, to learn how to write a test and to learn how it works within Laravel and what are the things to expect. So put on your first time beginner shoes with me and let's write our first test together. Okay, I'm not jumping into this completely blind because I know that there are two different testing frameworks or two different testing styles within Laravel. There's PEST and there's PHP unit. And when I think of this, I think of Laravel Livewire Volt, which kind of has these two different styles. If I was to find one, yeah, you have PEST, which is more the maybe functional kind of syntax. And then you have PHP unit, which is more the class-based, where we have a public function test basis test, this assert true. Now, based off of what I am most familiar with within Laravel Livewire and Livewire Volt specifically, I actually probably prefer the PHP unit syntax. But again, both of these are fantastically simple, and I probably actually might lean more into PEST after using it maybe a couple of different times. So why don't we create a new application and let's just run like the basic test that it scaffolds out for us and see where we can go from there. All right, so I created a new Laravel application. I used the Livewire Volt with the functional API just so I can get a feel of how that works with the PEST API versus PHP unit. I chose PEST for the starting framework, but again, if we were to take a look at the documentation, you can use both. Yeah, support for testing with PEST and PHP unit is included out of the box. So whether you choose PEST or PHP unit, that just depends on when we create a new test. For example, when we run PHP artisan make tests, that just decides which one it's going to scaffold out that stub for you. Very similar to if you were to run a make volt command, depending on if you chose the functional or the class-based API. All right, so let's get our test class running. And I would assume our tests go in either the feature example test. Okay, so this would be the PEST API, a profile test, and then we have an auth test, and this is Laravel Breeze that will scaffold it. And I assume these tests are then scaffolded out with Laravel Breeze. So we have authentication, email verification, password reset, password update, registration. Why don't we go through some of these and see what it's doing so I could know how testing happens out of the box. It looks like we do have a Volt testing class, and note that's similar to what Livewire uses as well. You have this kind of like Livewire test functionality, and we have that with Volt too. And in unit tests, and I know unit tests versus feature tests are probably more best practices as far as what I can remember from reading and listening to specific like podcast episodes and like that. From what I recall, again, this is you learning with me in this video, unit tests are more for like testing individual pieces of an application or components, whereas the features are testing what the application might be doing. So I believe stuff like mocks would be done within unit tests, whereas the feature tests is more like, okay, this should happen within this application. I would assume then that unit tests probably don't interact with the database as much as a feature test would. In this Laravel Breeze scaffolding, you can see here, if it's not covered by my head, that there are features tests for authentication, as well as an example test and a profile test. And then the unit test does not have any example tests out of the box. No components that are being tested within this. We just have an example test to expect to be true. So let's run these tests and see what the outcome would be, which I would assume tests everything that we have in these folders as well. So we can do that with PHP artisan test. So we have the example test, that true is true, login screen. So for authentication, users can log out. We have email verification screen. Okay, so that's really cool. I think that we can make sure these screens are being rendered so there's nothing breaking when we're testing to see if that's true. And then this is another example test for the features. And then a profile test. So profile page is displayed. User can delete their account. Correct password must be provided to delete account. Why don't we go through, let's do the authentication test. And then why don't I make a new page in Livewire? And of course, Livewire testing methods are going to be different than straight Laravel testing methods, but I think this will help me get a handle and hopefully help you learn along with me of the methods that we would think about as we're building maybe a new page, a new feature, and then create a test for it. So feature, we'll do auth, and we'll do that. Yeah, we'll do the authentication test. So I'm going to close that. So we have, again, this is using the pest syntax to test. So we have a test function. We'll look up in the docs if we don't know something out of the box for what we're learning here on the page. But this name, I would assume, is just what we would want to call the test. Let's take a look at the PHP unit one. We'll do Laravel new testing PHP unit. We'll do Breeze with the class API, and we'll do PHP unit testing. Just so we can get a side-by-side of how these tests that come out of the box with Breeze are created versus pest syntax, for example. All right, testing PHP unit. Let's open this up in VS Code as well, and we'll do a little side-by-side. This does look very similar to the difference between a Volt class-based versus functional API, and I would assume that's where a lot of the syntax for Volt came from, just because I know that Nuno from the Laravel team created pest and created Volt, at least the functional API version of Livewire Volt. So we do have some similar things. And you can see here, the test login screen can be rendered. So that is exactly what I was trying to get at. And again, we're looking at this before we look at the docs, unless we need something. I like to kind of show and see when I'm learning something, how is someone else doing that thing so that I can learn how to do that. So we have test login screen can be rendered. So the function of the name is going to be similar to how we call this name. And I would assume that's just how the test runs. I wonder if there's any kind of different visual visibilities with PHP unit. So we can run PHP artisan test. Okay, so yeah, same kind of output. So test login screen can be rendered. This function is going to be very similar to how we would call this test function. This would respond with, we're expecting to get a response of the /login page. And then we can just make sure, does that page exist? Assert C Volt, and that would be the pages. So within Livewire Volt would be resources, views, Livewire, and then we have C Volt would probably be, that's the default directory, Livewire in resources route, or views, resources views, then Livewire, then anything here, so pages, and then login. So I think this response is just saying, does it see this Volt login page? Is there actual response coming from that page? And that is because there is a route associated with it. I am curious for the testing, and this is probably just comes down to best practice versus just what you would prefer to do. But when it comes to testing specific components, whether that's an inertia component or a Volt component or something other than that, I am curious of if you would do a response to the page itself, which I would assume it's this get login page. Okay, I probably answered my question there because we check if the get login page exists, and then is there a component on that page? Because in the login page, okay, and it looks like, yeah, the login page is a Volt component. So that would make sense then why we're asserting to see Volt. So the login page is a Volt component. So when we're testing a full page Volt component, we would do just that. I am curious what you would do with a non-full page component. So if we, in our dashboard, for example, wanted to test a Volt component, if we would first respond to get the /dashboard and then do that. Okay, so /login, I understand how that works. We want to make sure the login screen can be rendered. We have the login route, and then we have the Volt component on the page. Users can authenticate using the login screen. We can create a new user with test. That's awesome. I love that. And we need to test. We need to set form email and form password. Let's take a look at what that is doing in login. So pages.auth.login. Okay. And then we have form.email. And that's probably just this wire model, I would assume that it's doing there. So we're setting the form.email via the name set for wire model, or what we're modeling within Livewire, and form.password. We can call the method, which would be the login method. Perfect. So we're setting the component to this component, and we're setting all of this state, and then we're calling the method. Assert has no errors. Okay. And then we want to assert redirect. How does this look in PHP unit? Pretty similar, because I would assume these methods are similar across Volt as they would be in PHP unit. Again, if you're using something like Inertia or just Blade, I would assume a lot of these standards across testing are true for when it comes to components or features. You need to make sure a form works and expects the same result from submitting that form. Then we can assert that they have been authenticated. Easy enough. So authenticated here. Navigation menu can be rendered. Okay, users can log out. Okay. I think I understand the purpose of it. It's to make sure a screen renders. We are filling out anything that happens on that screen and then using it as that. Let's do a less, maybe registration, password update, password reset. Let's see if anything. So email verification or password reset, that would probably do something within the database. Let's see. We have a notification fake. Okay. And then in the profile test, this would probably update the user. So we need user refresh, and we need to assert the same test user as the username. So yeah, this is testing to see the profile information can be updated. So you're setting the name and email for these specific attributes. And then we're calling that Livewire method. And after the user has been updated, we are just checking to make sure that they have actually been updated according to the test. Same here for deleting the account. We're acting as the user. Okay, that's very interesting. So we're creating a new user for every single test that we create. And so I can pull that up for PHP unit over here, profile test. Let's go to can delete their account. Here we go. So we're creating a new user for every single test that we create. That's interesting to me. So it's saying that we're not using the same test user. We're essentially reinstantiating this user every single time we need to call a test. Volt test, profile delete user form. So after we're trying to delete this user, in the sense that we're setting their password to delete the user in this Livewire Volt component, we're just showing that it does what we expect it to do. In this case, we don't want any errors, and we want to redirect that user to the specific page that we need them to be redirected to. And then assert guest. We're just checking to see, is this now a guest user who's logged in? Because if they're deleted, there should be no user. And then does the user exist or not? I understand a lot of what's going on. It's doing the things that you would normally do after creating a new test or a new feature, for example. You're checking to see, does that feature work like I intended it to? And this has like backwards compatibility, where within testing, a lot of the times what you want to do is create the test, create the feature, and then as we update the feature, we would know when something actually breaks to where we would want it to be. And I believe in the documentation, it mentions that. When getting started for tests, and this kind of mentions what I had been theorizing on at the start of this video, generally most of your tests should be feature tests. These types of tests provide the most confidence that your system as a whole is functioning as intended. And that's exactly what we're doing within testing. Whether you're choosing Pest or PHP unit, or you're using Livewire or Inertia, every single test should be created with the fact that I am expecting what I just built in my code for my users to do is actually working how I intended it. So why don't we go ahead and create a new test? I created a new Volt component that basically just shows the list of to-dos with the with function, and then we can add a new to-do by this function, this add to-do function, where we're setting it to our auth users to-dos and creating a new to-do with the title that we've been giving it here. So how can we create a new test testing this feature? Let's go ahead and run PHP artisan make test. What should the test be named? We can call it maybe to-do test, and this is a feature test. Okay, so that was simple enough. Now we have this to-do test feature. We need to first, and if we're pulling up the profile test, for example, first we need to make sure that this page is displayed. So that would be a good thing to test. So first we want to say is to-do page is displayed. So we need to get the dashboard page because that is what we are referencing here, dashboard. But we need to get a new user first. New user factory create, and we want to act as this user. Bring in that model here. Then we can get the dashboard page. We would need to make sure we see that Volt component. So first we need to assert OK on the dashboard page. And then we need to, can we see Volt, the to-do manager? I believe that's what we call it. Yeah, to-do manager. So that's the profile that we're wanting to see. Let's make sure that this tests run, PHP artisan test. Let's see, to-do page is displayed. Great, I just wrote my first test. Let's keep going. Let's make sure that a new to-do can be entered. So test, new to-do can be added. Perfect. Let's create this as a function. And yeah, again, every time let's instantiate a new user. So acting as user, let's see what this kind of whipped up for us. We're getting the dashboard page. Okay, it looks like in here, I'm pulling up the profile test again, view and then see what can be changed. We're getting the same information. We just need to test the component though, instead of asserting everything's okay. We've already done that. So we don't need to get dashboard or anything like that. We just need the specific component that we want to use. The component, which is going to be the Volt test, and we're going to call the component to-do manager. We want to set the title of a test to do, and then we're going to call the add to do method. So we look here, we have this add to do function or method within this Volt component. That's what we need to call after we create that to do. We can check the component has no errors, refresh, but then instead of asserting the user, we need to see if that to do was added. So what we can do here is, yeah, let's make sure there's no errors in the component, and then maybe we can call to do equals user fresh to do first. Then we can check if, yeah, first we want to refresh the user, and then we can see if the user has a new to do, because we're creating a new user here, so they now should have one to do, right? The profile information is going to be very similar to what we're doing with the to-dos, except we're just staying in the user here. So I would assume at some point we probably have to call the to-do, or maybe we would just call the to-dos on the user method. So we can say like this, assert same, and we can say the test to do is the user to do's first title. Yeah, because that should be set the same, right? We probably could call something like to do up here and create that or instantiate that, but this should be what we're looking for, right? Let's see, what is the error that it's showing here? Unexpected variable name, expected. And I had some weird characters over here, so that might be it. So let's run that test again, PHP artisan test. Okay, it's running that as pass. And I think that's basically what we want, because we want to make sure that we grab the to-do from that user, and then that to-do has now been added. And this might be actually something that we can call too. We don't necessarily need a redirect. So why don't we check for that in our to-do test? Component has no errors, assert no redirect. We want to also assert that this has a Boolean of false. So assert false to do completed. And that should be good to go for that new to do. Yeah, so let's double check. PHP, artisan test. 1 failed. Okay, let's see. Failed asserting that 0 is false. Okay, so this assert false to do completed. It's probably because I have not cast it. So if I was to do's and let's cast this, not public, protected, cast completed as a Boolean. Now if I was to run this again, there we go. It is very satisfying to see that green flash across the screen where we now have a to-do page can be displayed. We should probably call this to-do component can be displayed because that's what we're calling technically. And then a new to-do can be added. Well, thank you for joining me and writing our first test together. You can see how something like testing can be incredibly useful. And I know that those of you watching this have probably written a test before and you're not like me, but hopefully this just gives you an inclination that there are things that we all don't know. And it's okay to be learning those new things together, whether that's something like testing and joining me on the journey of writing a first feature test, or maybe we'll do a unit test next time, but also just knowing that every single thing that we learn along the way as developers, as Laravel developers, is brand new at some point in time. So be generous and be kind to the people who are learning along with you. And if you've never written a test along with me and this was your first time as well, hopefully you learned something new like I did. It's not actually that hard or that intimidating, and it's incredibly useful. Plus, it's also just really satisfying seeing that green bar, right?